I never expected that a burst water pipe in my apartment building would change my life. But that's exactly what happened. That's how these things work sometimes, isn't it? The universe doesn't send you a neatly typed invitation to the first day of your new existence. It just floods your neighbor's apartment and sends him knocking on your door in the middle of the night, smelling of damp drywall and desperation. Before that night, my life was a study in quiet routine. My name is Miles, and I work from home as a graphic designer. My apartment was my sanctuary, a carefully curated space of neutral colors, clean lines, and the comforting hum of my computer. It was predictable. It was safe. And, if I were being honest with myself, it was a little lonely. My days were measured in project deadlines and the position of the sun as it tracked across my living room floor. I knew the mail carrier's schedule, the precise time the elderly woman in 3B took her small dog out, and the rumble of the garbage truck on Tuesday mornings. It was a life of observation from behind a window, a comfortable but distinct separation from the world outside. I was a spectator in my own building, and for the most part, I was content with that role. It required nothing of me but my passive attention, and it offered no risk of disappointment. Then there was Caleb. He lived in 2A, directly across the hall. He was the opposite of my quiet existence. Caleb was loud, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that just took up space, that announced his presence with an unapologetic vitality. I'd hear his heavy work boots clomping up the stairs, the low thud of a dropped gym bag, the cheerful, booming sound of his voice on the phone. He was a contractor, I gathered, and he had the build for it. Broad shoulders, strong arms, a constant dusting of something that looked like sawdust in his dark hair. From my peephole, I saw the parade of his life. Friends who laughed as loudly as he did. The occasional woman who would leave in the morning looking pleased with herself. He was handsome in a rugged, easy way that felt miles away from my own world. He had a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and he used it freely on everyone he passed in the hallway. He was, in every observable way, completely and utterly straight. He was the kind of man I'd learned long ago to admire from a very safe distance, a beautiful piece of art in a museum with a strict do not touch policy. We had a nodding acquaintance, the kind city dweller's perfect. Hey, how's it going? In passing, a shared grimace in the elevator when it smelled like someone's takeout garlic bread. I once helped him carry a ridiculously large flat-pack bookcase up the stairs, and he'd thanked me with that blinding smile and a clap on the shoulder that felt like it had rearranged my bones. For my part, I had held my breath the entire time, hyper-aware of the heat of his arm brushing against mine, of the way his biceps strained against the fabric of his t-shirt. I'd retreated into my apartment afterward, my heart doing a strange, frantic little dance, and told myself to get a grip. He was just the friendly, attractive, straight guy from across the hall. That was all. But here's the thing about quiet observation. You start to notice the details. I noticed that he always held the main door for Mrs. Gable from 3B, even if it meant waiting a full minute for her to make her way down the hall. I saw him, through my window, stop to help a kid who'd dropped his groceries all over the sidewalk, crouching down to retrieve a rolling orange without a hint of annoyance. There was a fundamental kindness to him that shone through the boisterous exterior, a gentle current beneath the loud, crashing waves. And that, more than the broad shoulders or the easy smile, was what made the distance I kept feel less like a choice and more like a sad necessity. He was a fixed point in my routine, a piece of the building's ecosystem I had cataloged and filed away. He was the man across the hall. Nothing more. I had my world, and he had his, and the 4 inches of dead air in the hallway between our doors was a chasm I never, ever expected to cross. I was certain of it. But certainty, as I was about to find out, is a fragile thing, easily washed away by a few hundred gallons of hot water going where it shouldn't. The inciting incident, when it came, wasn't dramatic. It was just a frantic, insistent knocking that shattered the late-night silence of my apartment. I wasn't used to visitors, especially not at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. My heart hammered against my ribs as I peered through the peephole, the warped, fisheye lens showing me a distressed-looking Caleb, his hair damp and plastered to his forehead. I unlocked the door, my mind racing through a dozen unlikely scenarios. "Miles, man, I am so sorry to bother you this late," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He was barefoot, wearing only a pair of gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips and a thin white t-shirt that was soaked through in patches. Water dripped from the ends of his hair onto the welcome mat. Total disaster. The pipe to my water heater burst. My entire place is flooding. I could hear it then, a faint hissing and spraying sound from across the hall, the sound of a small-scale catastrophe in progress. I stepped aside, pulling the door open wider. "Oh wow. Come in, come in. Are you okay?" He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking utterly overwhelmed. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just soaked. And a little screwed. I shut off the main valve, but the damage is done. The landlord's sending an emergency plumber, but my place is a swamp. The ceiling in my bathroom basically collapsed." He gestured helplessly toward his apartment, and for the first time, I saw him as something other than the confident, easygoing neighbor. I saw someone vulnerable, someone thrown completely off kilter. "That's awful," I said, my voice full of genuine sympathy. "Do you need anything?" "Towels. A place to make some calls." He gave me a grateful, weary smile. It was different from his usual bright, hallway smile. This one was smaller, more genuine. "Towels would be amazing, thanks. And, this is a huge ask, I know, but is there any chance I could use your shower? I was trying to get all my stuff off the floor, and I'm covered in, well, I think it's century-old ceiling gunk," he grimaced, pulling at the damp fabric of his shirt. The request hung in the air between us. It was so simple, so practical. But for me, the thought of Caleb, the man I'd secretly admired from a distance, being in my bathroom, in my shower, it sent a strange jolt through my system. It was an intrusion into my carefully controlled world, but one I couldn't possibly refuse. My space was about to be occupied by the one person I had deliberately kept at a distance. "Of course," I said, trying to sound casual, as if handsome, half-dressed neighbors asked to use my shower every day. "Yeah, no problem at all. It's just down the hall to the left. I'll grab you some towels." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "Miles, you're a lifesaver. Seriously, I owe you big time." He walked past me into my apartment, and the whole atmosphere of the room seemed to shift. My quiet, orderly space suddenly felt charged, smaller, intensely aware of his presence within its walls. He brought the scent of rain and damp earth and something that was just uniquely him. As I went to the linen closet, I could feel the predictable rhythm of my life starting to fracture, to break apart into something new and terrifying and utterly unknown. The chasm between our doors had been crossed. He was in my apartment for the next 3 days while the plumbers and restoration crews did their work. That first night, after his shower, he emerged from my bathroom rubbing a towel over his hair, wearing a pair of my sweatpants that were just a little too short on him. The sight was so jarringly domestic it made my throat feel tight. We sat in my living room, the late-night news murmuring from the television, and he told me about the extent of the damage. It was bad. It was going to be weeks before his place was livable again. "I can crash with my buddy across town," he said, staring at the muted screen. "But it's a long commute to the sites I'm working right now," he sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. And then he looked at me. "Look, I know this is insane to ask, but your couch. Would you be willing to rent it to me? For a week, maybe 2? I'll pay you, of course. I'd be out early, back late. You'd barely know I was here." I should have said no. I should have pointed him in the direction of his buddy's place or a cheap motel. It was the sensible thing to do, the thing that would protect my peace, my routine, my carefully guarded heart. But looking at him, seeing the genuine stress in his eyes, the word no just wouldn't form. "Don't be ridiculous," I heard myself say. "You can't pay me to use my couch. Just stay. It's fine. Stay as long as you need." His relief was palpable, a wave of it washing over his face, and his smile returned, brighter this time. He was a refugee, and I had just offered him sanctuary. The problem was, I wasn't sure my own heart was safe from the man I'd just let inside. Living with Caleb was a series of small shocks to my system. My apartment, once a silent workspace, was now filled with his sounds. The low rumble of his voice on the phone with insurance adjusters, the clink of a coffee mug in the morning, the soft thud of his boots being dropped by the door at night. My carefully ordered life was being gently, but irrevocably, disordered, and I found that I didn't mind as much as I thought I would. In fact, a part of me, a part I'd kept dormant for a long time, started to wake up. He was an impeccable house guest. He was tidy, respectful of my space, and deeply, almost painfully grateful. The first morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee, a pot already brewed and waiting for me. He'd left for work before I was even awake, but a sticky note was on the counter. Thanks again for everything. Help yourself. See, it was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental. No one had made coffee for me in years. We fell into a strange, temporary rhythm. I'd work during the day, lost in the world of fonts and color palettes. He'd come home in the evening, tired and covered in a fine layer of dust, and drop onto the couch with a groan. I started making enough dinner for two without even thinking about it. Our first meal together was awkward, filled with polite questions and careful answers. But by the third night, the stiffness had begun to melt away. We talked, really talked. I learned that he wasn't just a contractor. He co-owned a small business that specialized in custom cabinetry and fine woodworking. His hands, which I had only seen as strong and capable, were also creative, skilled at shaping raw wood into something beautiful. He spoke about grains and joinery with a passion that surprised me, a quiet intensity that was a world away from the loud, boisterous guy I thought I knew. I was seeing the layers peel back, revealing the man underneath the assumptions I had made. One evening, I was struggling with a logo design for a client, staring at my screen until my eyes burned. Caleb, who had been quietly looking over my shoulder, pointed a calloused finger at the monitor. What if you tried moving that element just a little to the left, to give it more room to breathe? The balance feels off. I was about to dismiss the comment, but I tried it. And he was right. It instantly looked better. How did you know that? I asked, genuinely surprised. He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his neck. I don't know. Woodworking is all about balance and lines. Negative space is just as important as the object itself. Guess it's the same idea. He then revealed he'd taken some art classes in college before dropping out to start his business. He missed it. He missed drawing. He was more than sawdust and loud laughter. He was thoughtful. He had an artist's eye. My perception of him shifted again, cracking and reforming into something much more complex, much more dangerous to my heart. The most significant moment happened on our fourth night living together. We were cleaning up after dinner, standing side by side at my small kitchen sink. It was a comfortable silence, the only sounds the running water and the clink of plates. I reached for the dish soap at the same time he did, and our hands brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I glanced at him, my heart suddenly pounding. He was looking down at our hands, then his eyes met mine. His expression was unreadable, a flicker of something I couldn't name passing through them. The moment stretched, taut and silent, thick with unspoken meaning. Was it just my imagination? My own wishful thinking painting meaning onto a meaningless accident. Then he cleared his throat, breaking the spell, and handed me the soap. Sorry, he mumbled, turning his attention back to the sink. But the air had changed. The easy camaraderie was replaced by a new awareness, a low hum of tension that hadn't been there before. I spent the rest of the night replaying that tiny, insignificant touch in my mind, analyzing it, dissecting it, desperately hoping it meant something while simultaneously terrified that it did. The line between being a kind host and wanting something more had become terrifyingly, exhilaratingly blurry. The turning point was born from an act of kindness. A stupid, clumsy act of kindness on my part. The day after the hand-brushing incident at the sink, the tension between us was a living thing in the apartment. We were polite, almost excessively so, careful not to get too close, our conversations stilted and safe. That morning, a delivery truck had dropped off some of the salvaged furniture from Caleb's apartment, things the restoration company had managed to dry out. They left a heavy, waterlogged armchair in the building's lobby. I'll get it later with a friend, Caleb said when he saw it. But I, in a ridiculous attempt to be helpful and maybe break the awkwardness between us, decided I could handle it myself. It's fine, I can help you, I insisted, high on some kind of misplaced confidence. The chair wasn't just heavy, it was awkwardly shaped and still damp. We wrestled it up the 2 flights of stairs, our hands occasionally bumping, our bodies moving in a clumsy, synchronized effort. We were on the final step when it happened. I shifted my grip, my foot slipped, and a searing, white-hot pain shot through my back. I cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound, and let go of my end. The chair thudded down, and I crumpled against the wall, my breath hitched in my chest. Every muscle in my lower back and right shoulder seized in a vicious, agonizing spasm. Miles, are you okay? Caleb was instantly at my side, his face a mask of concern. He helped me the last few feet into my apartment and onto the couch, his hand strong and steadying on my arm. The pain was breathtaking. I couldn't straighten up, and any attempt to lift my right arm sent fresh waves of agony through me. I'm so sorry, he kept saying. This is my fault. I shouldn't have let you help me. It's not your fault, I gasped, trying to find a position that didn't feel like I was being stabbed. I'm the idiot who insisted. Later that afternoon, it was clear this wasn't a minor tweak. I could barely move. The simple act of sitting up was a monumental effort. The idea of taking a shower, of lifting my arms to wash my hair, was completely out of the question. I felt pathetic and helpless, trapped in my own body. That evening, as I was debating the logistics of a sponge bath, Caleb came and stood in the living room doorway, looking hesitant. Hey, he said softly, you need to get cleaned up. It'll probably make you feel better. I just gave him a miserable look. I can't, I said, my voice tight with frustration. I can't lift my arm, Caleb. I can't even really stand up straight. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. He seemed to be having some kind of internal debate. Then he took a deep breath and his voice was low and steady when he spoke. Then let me help you. My brain short-circuited. What? Let me help you, he repeated, his eyes holding mine, his expression completely serious. In the shower. I can wash your hair. Help you get clean. It's the least I can do. This happened because of my stupid chair. The air crackled. The suggestion was so intimate, so far beyond the boundaries of neighborly concern, that I couldn't process it at first. The thought of him in that small, enclosed space with me, the thought of his hands on my body, it was both terrifying and something I wanted with a desperate, painful ache. Caleb, you don't have to do that, I stammered, my face heating up. I know I don't have to, he said, and his voice was softer now, gentler. I want to. Just let me help you, Miles. Please. There was something in his eyes, a sincerity and a deep, quiet concern that cut through my embarrassment. It felt like more than just pity. It felt like care. And I was in too much pain and too pathetically captivated by the offer to say no. I nodded, a small, jerky movement. And just like that, everything was about to change. He helped me to my feet, his arms securely around my waist, supporting my weight. The walk to the bathroom felt like a mile. Every step was a careful negotiation with the pain in my back. He was infinitely patient, moving at my pace, his body a warm, solid presence against mine. Once inside the small room, the reality of the situation crashed down on me. The space seemed to have shrunk, filled with a charged, nervous energy. Caleb turned on the water, adjusting the temperature with a practiced efficiency. Steam began to fill the room, softening the edges of the tiled walls, cocooning us in a warm, humid cloud. Okay, he said, his voice a low murmur against the sound of the spraying water. Let's get your shirt off. He was all business, but I could see a faint tremor in his hands as he helped me ease the t-shirt over my head, my own movements stiff and pained. Standing there, bare-chested in front of him, I felt impossibly vulnerable. He didn't look away. His eyes briefly scanned my torso before meeting mine again, his expression unreadable. He helped me out of my pants and into the shower stall, a plastic stool already placed under the stream of water. I sat down, my back screaming in protest, and leaned my head against the cool tile. Caleb stepped into the shower after me, fully clothed in his jeans and t-shirt, not seeming to care about the water that immediately began soaking him. The space was tight, his knee brushing against mine. He picked up the shampoo bottle, his movements deliberate. You okay with this? He asked, his voice barely audible over the water. I just nodded, unable to speak. He squeezed a dollop of shampoo into his palm, and then his hands came to my head. His fingers were strong, and his touch was shockingly gentle. He began to lather the shampoo into my hair, his thumbs working in slow, deliberate circles at my temples, then moving to the base of my neck. I closed my eyes, a shudder running through me that had nothing to do with the water temperature. It was the most intensely intimate, non-sexual act I had ever experienced. No one had touched me with such tenderness in years. His focus was absolute. He worked the lather through my hair, his knuckles occasionally grazing my scalp, sending little sparks through my entire nervous system. The scent of my own shampoo seemed foreign, transformed by his touch. All I could focus on was the feeling of his hands, the warm water sluicing over my shoulders, and the steady, solid presence of his body so close to mine. When he was done, he carefully rinsed the suds away, his fingers combing through my hair to make sure it was all out. Then he picked up the bar of soap. "Lean forward a bit," he instructed softly. I did, my body responding to his command without thought. He began to wash my back, his hand moving in slow, steady strokes over my tight, aching muscles. His touch was firm but careful, avoiding the epicenter of the pain but working around it, as if trying to soothe the injury through sheer force of will. Time seemed to warp and stretch in that steamy enclosure. There was no witty banter, no self-deprecating humor. There was only the sound of the water, the slick slide of soap on skin, and our shared, ragged breaths. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the dark patches spreading across his t-shirt as it became completely soaked. He was sacrificing his own comfort for mine, and the depth of that gesture settled deep in my bones. At that moment, under the spray of water and the gentle pressure of his hands, my carefully constructed walls of self-protection didn't just crack. They dissolved into dust. The days that followed were a masterclass in awkwardness. The profound intimacy of the shower was a ghost that haunted every room in my apartment. It hung in the air between us, unspoken, unacknowledged, yet overwhelmingly present. We went from easy cohabitation to a state of hyper-awareness, two magnets repelling each other with a force equal to the one that had so powerfully drawn us together. We avoided eye contact. We made sure to keep a careful physical distance. Our conversations reverted back to safe, bland topics: the weather, the progress on his apartment, what to have for dinner. It was a painstaking retreat to neutral territory, but we both knew we had crossed a border from which there was no real return. My back slowly began to heal, the sharp, stabbing pain dulling to a persistent ache. But my mind was a mess. I replayed the shower scene endlessly, a film loop stuck in my brain. I analyzed every single moment, every touch, every glance. I was an archaeologist excavating a ruin, searching for meaning in the smallest fragments. The gentle way Caleb's thumbs had massaged my temples, the focused, serious expression on his face, the way he hadn't flinched or pulled away when his knee brushed mine. Hope was a dangerous, seductive weed growing in the cracks of my anxiety. One part of me, the optimistic, romantic part one usually kept locked away, insisted that no one acts that way out of simple kindness. Not a straight man, anyway. The level of care, the complete lack of hesitation in the face of such a vulnerable, intimate task, it had to mean something more. It felt like a confession made without words. It felt like a question being asked. Right. But then the other part of me, the cautious, self-protective part, would scream back in protest. I was projecting. I was seeing what I wanted to see. Caleb was just a genuinely good person, an exceptionally kind man who felt responsible for my injury. He was helping a friend in need. To him, it was probably just a practical, albeit awkward, task. He was being a good guy, and I was twisting his decency into a romantic fantasy. The thought was mortifying. If I was wrong, if I had misread everything so completely, I would not only face the sting of rejection, but also the profound shame of having misinterpreted an act of pure kindness. I catch him looking at me sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His gaze would be intense, thoughtful, and the moment I'd look up and our eyes would meet, he'd quickly glance away, his neck flushing that same shade of red I'd noticed before. What did that mean? Was it embarrassment? Awkwardness? Or was it the same nervous energy that was thrumming just beneath my own skin? I had no idea. We were trapped in a state of suspended animation, both of us waiting for the other to make a move, to say the thing that would either break the tension or shatter the fragile hope I was clinging to. The silence became unbearable. It was heavier than the damp armchair, more painful than my injured back. The small talk felt like a lie, a thin veneer over the monumental truth of what had happened between us in that bathroom. Something had to give. I knew it. But I was terrified of being the one to push, to ask the question that could change everything. So I waited, caught in a purgatory of my own making, oscillating wildly between the exhilarating possibility that he felt the same way and the crushing fear that I was completely and utterly alone in this. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Saturday afternoon, a week after the incident. The weather matched the mood inside the apartment, gray, oppressive, and heavy. Caleb's apartment was almost finished, and he would be moving back in a day or two. The thought of him leaving, of our strange, intense proximity coming to an end, filled me with a quiet panic. If I didn't say something, if he didn't say something, this chance, this fragile, beautiful possibility, would just evaporate. We'd go back to being neighbors, nodding in the hallway, the memory of his hands on my skin a secret I would have to carry alone. He was standing by the living room window, staring out at the rain-streaked street below. He'd been quiet all day, a thoughtful, brooding energy coming off him in waves. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book, but my eyes were just scanning the same paragraph over and over. Finally, he turned away from the window and faced me. His expression was serious, determined. He looked like a man who had finally made a decision. "Miles," he said, his voice low and firm, cutting through the thick silence. "We need to talk." About the other day, my heart leaped into my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. I put my book down, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. "Okay," I managed to say, my own voice barely a whisper. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first, choosing instead to stare at the floor between his feet. "What happened in the shower?" he began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "It wasn't just me being a good neighbor. I mean, it was that you were hurt and I wanted to help. But it was more than that. For me." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. It was the same look I saw in my own reflection every morning. "I've wanted to talk to you for months, Miles. Not just, hey, in the hallway. Really talk to you. I didn't know how. I'm not always good at this stuff." He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh that held no humor. "I kept telling myself you were just being friendly, that I was imagining things." He was saying my own thoughts back to me. He was living in the same hopeful, anxious world I was. A wave of relief, so potent it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. "The whole burst pipe thing," he continued, a faint blush creeping up his neck. "It was real, the pipe did burst. But it wasn't as bad as I made it out to be. I could have stayed there. I saw an opportunity, an excuse to knock on your door. It was a cowardly move, I know, but I was running out of ideas." The revelation hung in the air. He had orchestrated this. Not the flood, but the proximity. He had wanted to be here, in my space, with me. The realization was staggering. All my careful analysis, all my second-guessing, it was all real. He took a deep breath. "When you got hurt, and I was helping you, being that close to you, touching you, everything I'd been feeling, trying to push down or ignore, it just all came to the surface. And I don't think I can pretend it's not there anymore." He looked at me then, his gaze steady and wide with a silent, pleading question. He had laid all his cards on the table. It was my turn. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the background, but it was overshadowed by a soaring, brilliant hope. "I felt it too," I said, and my voice was stronger now, clearer. "Caleb, I felt it for a long time. I assumed you were straight." A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "I assumed I was too, for a long time," he admitted quietly. "Turns out, I'm not. Or maybe I'm just Miles sexual. I don't know. All I know for sure is how I feel when I'm around you." He stood up and closed the distance between us, coming to a stop right in front of the couch. He reached out a hand, not to touch me, but just holding it there, an invitation. "So," he said softly, "what do we do now?" I didn't hesitate. I reached up and took his hand, my fingers lacing through his. His skin was warm and calloused, real and solid in my grasp. I stood up, so we were face to face, the air between us humming with a year's worth of unspoken attraction and a week's worth of unbearable tension. "I have an idea," I whispered, and I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was a kiss of mutual relief, of shared confession. It was confident and sure, the feeling of finally, after a long and uncertain journey, arriving home. In the weeks and months that followed our confession, life blossomed in ways I had never allowed myself to imagine. The apartment, which had once been my quiet sanctuary from the world, became our shared space, a place filled with easy laughter and the comfortable silence of two people who belonged together. Caleb moved back into his own apartment, but most nights he ended up at my place, or I at his. The hallway between our doors was no longer a chasm, but just a short, happy commute. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he snored softly when he was on his back, and that he hummed when he was sketching in the sketchbook he now left on my coffee table. He learned that I need at least 2 cups of coffee before I can form a coherent sentence, and that I have a ridiculous obsession with organizing my books by color. We went on dates, to museums he'd never been to restaurants I'd always been too nervous to try alone. We explored the city, but more importantly, we explored each other, discovering the hidden landscapes of our pasts, our fears, and our dreams. His friends, the loud and cheerful group I'd only ever seen from a distance, welcomed me without question. They were boisterous and kind, and they treated me like I had always been a part of their circle. I saw how much they loved Caleb, how they respected his quiet strength and his deep loyalty. It turned out the confident, extroverted man I first saw wasn't a facade. It was just one facet of the complex, wonderful person he was. He was both the man who could command a construction site and the man who could spend an hour debating the perfect shade of blue for a client's logo with me. We found our balance. He brought a joyful, vibrant energy into my quiet life, pulling me out of my shell and into the world. I, in turn, offered him a calm harbor, a place where he could set down the weight of his responsibilities and just be. He loved my quiet nature, the very thing I had always thought made me uninteresting. He said it was like still water, deep and clear. One evening, a few months in, we were cooking dinner together in my kitchen. I was washing vegetables at the sink, and he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "You know," he murmured into my ear, his voice a warm rumble against my back. "I was thinking of having a plumber look at my shower. The water pressure is terrible," I laughed, leaning back into his embrace. The memory of that night was no longer a source of anxiety, but a cornerstone of our story, a moment of profound vulnerability that had become our foundation. "Don't you dare," I said, turning my head to kiss him. "I think the water pressure is perfect just the way it is." He smiled against my lips, a slow, happy smile that still made my heart skip a beat. It's funny, really. For so long, I believed that safety lay in solitude, in keeping the world at a comfortable distance. I built walls to protect myself from the possibility of getting hurt, but all they really did was keep me from the possibility of being truly seen. It took a burst pipe and an act of incredible, unexpected tenderness to wash those walls away. It took letting someone into my space, into my life, and trusting them with my vulnerability. Caleb didn't just wash my hair that day. He washed away the lonely quiet, the fear, the certainty that I was meant to be an observer of life rather than a participant. He showed me that the greatest risks often lead to the most beautiful rewards, and that sometimes the person you need most has been right across the hall all along, just waiting for a reason to knock.